Imagine this. You're just a child, barely 4 years old, and as you lie in bed, ready to drift off into sleep, you hear voices. Voices that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. They're not your parents calling from the next room, not your siblings playing tricks on you. No, these voices are different. They are in your head, whispering in tones both chilling and calm, urging you to stay awake, telling you things no child should ever hear. Welcome to Sinister Stories, where today, I'm sharing my true and haunting experiences, events that still send shivers down my spine to this very day. This is not a story from a book or figment of imagination. This is my reality, and it's far scarier than anything you've ever read or heard. From a very young age, my nights were never peaceful. While other kids had lullabies and bedtime stories, I had something far more sinister waiting for me as soon as the lights went out. I could feel the cold setting in, creeping across the room, as if the warmth of my little sanctuary was being sucked away by something unseen. That's when the whispers began. They weren't like any normal voice. They carried a hollow resonance, like they were being spoken from a place not of this world. It was as if they were bouncing off the walls of an empty cavern, echoing inside my head, where no one else could hear them. "Don't sleep," they would say, their voices almost hypnotic, urging me to fight the sleep that was trying to claim me. "Stay with us. Listen." There was something about the way they spoke, something that made me feel like I wasn't alone, yet utterly isolated at the same time. And I could picture them, even though my eyes were tightly shut. Two men, dressed in clothes that seemed like they belonged to another era. Their eyes were dark, as if they had seen far too much, and their smiles were twisted, not in an overtly threatening way, but enough to let me know that their intentions were anything but good. These voices seemed to know me, seemed to know everything about me. They called me by my name, softly at first, and then with a growing insistence that made my heart pound harder in my tiny chest. I remember one particular night, when their conversation shifted into something bizarrely mundane. They began talking about fish. "Yes, fish. We used to eat fish," one of them said, and I could see it in my mind. Two men sitting at a rickety old table, their hands grimy as they tore into cooked fish, the firelight casting long shadows across their faces. They laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was empty, devoid of warmth, like they were mocking something I couldn't understand. I tried to ignore them, tried to cover my ears with my pillow, but the voices weren't outside. They were inside, as much a part of my mind as my own thoughts. They kept talking, their words drifting into nonsensical, unsettling things. Tales of how they ended up here, wherever here was, and why they were speaking to me. "We have no rest," one of them whispered, his voice dropping to a tone that felt like a blade grazing the skin. "And neither will you. This is the beginning of my story, the beginning of how my innocent childhood turned into a nightmare that I could never wake from. I know it sounds impossible, unreal even, but this is what happened to me. And if you've ever felt the touch of something you can't see, if you've ever heard a voice that no one else could, then you know. There are things in this world we are not meant to understand. If you're ready to hear more about my encounters with the unknown, if you're drawn to tales that blur the line between what is real and what shouldn't be, then stay with me. Like this video, subscribe to Sinister Stories, and share this tale with anyone who thinks they're brave enough to listen. Because the voices are still out there, whispering, waiting. And maybe, just maybe, tonight, they'll choose to visit you too. Picture an ordinary child's bedroom, a place of comfort, safety, and dreams. But at night, my room became something else entirely, a gateway to nightmares that would not end. It was a small space, filled with the kind of clutter you'd expect from a young child. Stuffed animals sitting innocently on shelves, a small nightlight glowing faintly by the bedside, casting soft, warm hues against the walls. But as the darkness crept in, those once comforting toys seemed to take on a different character, their shadows stretching long and distorted, the faint light only serving to emphasize the darkness pressing in from every corner. The air would change the moment the sun set. The warmth of the day would dissipate, leaving behind an eerie chill that seemed to sink into the bones. It wasn't just the temperature. It was a stillness, a suffocating quiet that wrapped around me like a shroud. I could hear the silence, if that makes any sense. It was too thick, too absolute, like the entire world outside had ceased to exist, and only my small room remained, cut off from everything else. The shadows in the corners of my room seemed to deepen, pooling together, as if something was lurking within them, something watching, waiting. My bed, once a haven for monsters, tucked under the safety of a blanket, now felt exposed, as if it were a stage in the middle of a dark, empty theater. I'd pull the covers up to my chin, trying to convince myself that nothing was there, that it was just my imagination. But it was more than that. There was a presence in the room, an oppressive weight that settled on my chest, making it hard to breathe. It was as if unseen eyes were fixed on me, following my every move, my every breath. I could never see anything, but I could feel it, just out of sight, hiding in the darkness that seemed to creep closer each time I blinked. And then, the voices would start. They were subtle at first, whispering my name in a way that almost blended with the sound of the wind outside. But it wasn't the wind. I knew that because the whispers were inside my mind, a constant murmur that wouldn't let me be. "Are you awake?" they'd ask, their voices neither male nor female, just cold, detached, and yet somehow so intimately familiar that it made my skin crawl. I remember staring at the door, hoping for it to creak open, and for my parents to come in, to break the spell the room seemed to be under, but no one ever came. I was alone with the voices. The room felt alive, the shadows shifting in ways that didn't make sense. My eyes would play tricks on me, making me think I saw movement, a flicker here, a shifting outline there, always just beyond where I was looking. The closet door, usually shut tight, seemed to inch open on its own, a sliver of darkness spilling out as if the shadows within were trying to escape. It was then that I began to realize the voices, chilling whispers, weren't coming from nowhere. They were coming from within the very walls of my room, from the closet, from beneath the bed, from the cracks and crevices where the darkness festered. My bedroom had become prison. I dreaded the nights, knowing that when the sun dipped below the horizon, I would once again be trapped in whatever it was that shared that space with me. I could almost feel the walls closing in, the ceiling seeming low, the darkness thickening, pressing in from all sides until I was certain I would be swallowed whole. And then I saw my mother. Those two figures with hollow eyes and twisted smiles. They were always there, watching me from some distant place, their whispers growing louder, more insistent as each night passed. I was too young to understand it, but now I know. My room wasn't just haunted, it was possessed, claimed by something that refused to let me go. That's where it all began, in a place that should have been my sanctuary. My room became a gateway to something else, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred until I couldn't tell if I was asleep or awake, safe or in danger. This is just the beginning of my story, a place where fear took root and where the voices first found me. If you've ever felt that creeping sense of dread in a room you thought you knew, if you've ever felt like something was watching you from the shadows, then you might understand. Stay with me as we delve deeper into the horrors that unfolded. And remember, sometimes the places we trust the most are the ones that betray us in the dark. The first signs that something was terribly wrong were almost easy to dismiss. It started with the kind of things you could write off as a trick of the mind. The soft creaking of the floorboards in the dead of night, like someone taking cautious steps right outside my door. The air would grow cold without reason, a chill that seemed to rise from the very ground, crawling up my spine and causing goosebumps to spread across my skin. It was like the warmth of the room was being leached away, as though something unseen was draining it, and with it, my sense of safety. I remember lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, when I first heard the faintest of whispers. It was barely audible, like a breath against the walls, and I convinced myself it was just the wind. But then it happened again, clearer, closer, a voice, whispering my name. It wasn't my mother or my father. It was someone else, someone whose voice carried an unsettling familiarity, as if it knew me intimately, better than I knew myself. "Are you awake, little one?" it asked, almost sweetly, and a cold dread settled deep in my chest. The whispers began to escalate. They would come just as I was on the edge of sleep, that vulnerable moment when my mind was drifting, making me question whether I was awake or dreaming. They would say strange things, disconnected, eerie words that seemed to have no context. One night, they spoke of a grave. "The earth is soft tonight," one of the voices murmured, and I could almost see it. Dark soil being dug up by unseen hands, a shallow hole in the dead of night. Another night, they spoke of someone waiting. "He's here, right outside," they said, and I felt my breath catch in my throat as I found myself staring at the window, half expecting to see a figure standing there, watching me. The most chilling part was the growing realization that these voices weren't just random noises. They were aware of me. They knew when I was awake. They knew when I was scared, and they thrived on it. I tried to ignore them, to pretend I couldn't hear, but they knew. "Don't pretend you can't hear us," one hissed, and I felt a sudden pressure on my chest, like an invisible hand pressing me down into the mattress, holding me there. I wanted to scream, to call out for my parents, but my voice was caught in my throat, strangled by fear. The room felt darker. The shadows seemed to pulse and shift, and I knew there was something in there with me. One night, I heard a different sound, something that made my blood run cold, a soft scraping, like nails dragging across wood. It was coming from under my bed. My heart pounded as I lay there, frozen, every muscle locked in terror. The scraping continued, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was beneath me wanted me to know it was there, wanted me to hear it. I could imagine it. A hand, pale and skeletal, reaching out from the darkness, its nails dragging across the floorboards, moving closer and closer to the edge of the bed. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling the blanket over my head, trying to will it away. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, until it was all I could hear. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse, a deafening void that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, afraid that if I did, whatever was under the bed would finally reach out and pull me down into the darkness. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, until the first light of dawn began to creep in through the window, chasing away the shadows. Only then did I dare to peek out, to look around the room that now seemed so ordinary in the daylight. But I knew better. I knew that the night would come again, and with it, the whispers, the cold, and the sense that something was very, very wrong. These first signs were just the beginning, the harbingers of something far more sinister. They were testing me, pushing me, seeing how far they could go before I broke. And I knew deep down that whatever was haunting me was only getting started. If you've ever felt that creeping dread, that sense that something is watching you from the shadows, then you understand. This is just the start of my story, the beginning of a nightmare that would only grow darker. Stay with me, and I'll take you deeper into the terror, deeper into the mystery of the voices that haunted me. And remember, when the night falls and the whispers begin, you're never truly alone. The conflict began when I had to make a choice, a choice no child should ever have to face. Night after night, the voices grew louder, more demanding, as if they were no longer content to simply exist in the shadows of my room. They wanted something from me, and I had to decide whether to acknowledge them or pretend they didn't exist. There's a unique terror that comes with knowing that your enemy can reach you anywhere, even in your own mind. Ignoring them seemed impossible. Their whispers clawed at the edges of my consciousness, turning every moment of silence into a waking nightmare. The whispers weren't content with just being heard. They began to make demands. "Look under the bed," one voice said, its tone dripping with malice. I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to comply, but the pressure in the room became suffocating, as though the very walls were closing in on me. "Look, or we'll come to you," they threatened, and in that moment, my fear reached a fever pitch. I had a choice: stay frozen in terror, unable to face whatever awaited me, or confront the thing that had been tormenting me all along. My heart pounded, and I could feel my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the blanket, deciding whether or not to lift it. The cold rationality of the voices contrasted with the fear that overwhelmed me. It was a battle within my own mind, one part screaming at me to stay hidden, to ignore them until they left me alone, and the other part, a tiny, insistent whisper, urging me to see, to understand what they wanted. The fear of the unknown was gnawing at me, making me question my sanity. What if it was all just my imagination? What if, by confronting it, I could end this nightmare for good? But there was a darker thought, too. What if, by facing it, I would invite something far worse into my world? I couldn't take it anymore. The whispers would not relent. They grew louder, more insistent, repeating my name over and over again until it felt like they were inside my very bones. I had known. With a shaky breath, I finally gathered the courage, my small fingers clutching the blanket as I slowly lifted it, inch by inch, until I could see the darkness underneath my bed. My eyes struggled to adjust, and for a moment, there was nothing. Just the empty void, the kind of darkness that seemed to absorb all light. But then, I saw them. Two eyes, wide and staring, reflecting the dim glow of my nightlight. They blinked, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone, replaced by a hollow silence that seemed to fill my entire being. The eyes were watching me, unblinking now, a gaze that pierced through me, as if they could see every fear, every weakness I had ever felt. The whispers fell silent, as if waiting, letting that moment stretch into eternity. And then, I heard it, a slow, deliberate scratching, the sound of nails dragging against the floor, moving closer and closer. The terror was unlike anything I had ever felt. It was primal, raw, and it froze me in place, every muscle in my body locking up as I stared into the darkness beneath my bed. My heart pounded so loudly that it was the only sound I could hear, drowning out everything else. But I knew that whatever was there was real, and it was waiting for me to make the next move. I had to decide, pull the blanket back down and pretend I hadn't seen anything, or face it, confront it fully, despite every instinct screaming at me to run. In the end, curiosity won over fear, but it was a hollow victory. I reached out, my hand trembling as I inched it towards the edge of the bed, as if touching the darkness would somehow give me control over it. But before I could get close, the eyes vanished, blinking out of existence, as though they had never been there. The scratching stopped, replaced by a silence so profound it was almost deafening. I pulled my hand back, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and I knew this was far from over. The voices had tested me, and I had failed. By giving in to my curiosity, I had acknowledged them, given them power over me. That night, I understood that ignoring the voices was no longer an option. They weren't going to leave, and pretending they didn't exist only made them angrier, more insistent. I had to decide how to fight back, how to reclaim my nights, but deep down, I knew that whatever was haunting me was not something I could simply wish away. The fear was growing, and the whispers were getting bolder. I had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. The unknown was no longer just a presence in the darkness. It was a force, something that demanded my attention, and I was trapped in its game. The night of the confrontation was unlike any other. The atmosphere was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if even the air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I lay in my bed, feeling the coldness seeping through the walls, an icy touch that sank into my bones. The whispers had been relentless that evening, louder than before, more demanding. "It's time," they said, their voices blending together, a chorus of something neither living nor dead. They spoke with a knowing urgency, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the chill of impending doom, of something inescapable that was drawing near. The room, once so familiar, had transformed into an alien, hostile place. The shadows seemed to have weight, moving on their own, stretching across the walls like dark tendrils, reaching out as if to touch me. I could hear the soft creaking of the floorboards, the sound of something moving just out of sight. It felt like the very walls were alive, pulsing with a malevolent force that I could not see but could sense with every fiber of my being. And then I saw it. A figure standing at the far corner of the room, barely illuminated by the faint glow of my nightlight. He was one of the men from my visions, his form blurred and indistinct, as if he were halfway between this world and another. He was tall, his face obscured by shadows, but I could feel his eyes on me. Those same hollow, staring eyes that had haunted my dreams. My heart pounded, my body frozen in place as he took a step forward, the floor creaking beneath his weight. He moved slowly, deliberately, and with each step, the temperature in the room seemed to drop even further, until I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The whispers were no longer just in my head. They filled the room, echoing off the walls, growing louder and louder until they were a deafening roar. "Come with us," they chanted over and over, and I felt the pressure building in my ears, a painful intensity that made my head throb. The figure moved closer, his face coming into view, and I could see the twisted smile that curved his lips, a smile that held no warmth, only malice. He reached out a hand, long fingers stretching towards me, and I could see the flesh was pale, almost translucent, as if he were more a ghost than a man. Fear rooted me to the spot, my body unwilling to respond, my mind screaming at me to move, to run, to do anything but lie there. I could feel the weight of his presence pressing down on me, a force that seemed to pin me to the bed. His fingers hovered inches above my face, and I could feel the cold radiating from them, an icy burn that seemed to freeze my very soul. The whispers crescendoed, their words blending together into an incoherent cacophony, and I knew that this was the moment I had to fight back, or be consumed by whatever this was. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I forced my body to move, lurching up from the bed, my hand reaching out to push him away. My fingers passed through his form, as if he were made of smoke, and a chill shot up my arm, a sensation so cold it felt like fire. He faded, his body dissipating into the darkness, but the whispers did not stop. They laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that seemed to come from all around me, and I knew this was far from over. They had wanted me to see them, to understand that they were real, that they could reach me whenever they wanted, and that there was nothing I could do to stop them. The room was empty now, the figure gone, but the shadows still seemed to pulse, to breathe, as if they were alive. I sat there, my body trembling, my skin cold and clammy, and I knew that I had only just begun to understand the true nature of what haunted me. The confrontation had not ended anything. It had only escalated. They were stronger now, more real, and they had no intention of leaving. The terror I felt was beyond words, a fear that came from knowing that the line between reality and nightmare had been shattered, and there was no going back. The confrontation with the supernatural had left me changed. The room was no longer just haunted. It was claimed, a domain of something far beyond my understanding. I knew they would come again, that this was only the beginning of a game I didn't know how to play, a game with no rules and no escape. And as I lay back down, the whispers began again, softer this time, almost a lullaby. "We're still here," they said, their voices dripping with malice and certainty. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks, and realized that this was my life now, a constant battle against an enemy I could neither see nor touch, but that would never let me go. The revelation came like a strike of lightning, sudden, blinding, and utterly terrifying. It happened on a night when the air was so still that even the slightest sound seemed to echo forever. I was lying in bed, my body exhausted from the endless nights of fear, and my mind teetering on the edge of despair. I had reached a point where the whispers were no longer just an intrusion. They were a constant companion, a haunting presence that lived within me. That night, the voices didn't just whisper. They chanted a rhythmic, hypnotic cadence that seemed to vibrate through the walls, the floor, even my own bones. The chanting was different from before, darker, more forceful, as if something had shifted, as if they were preparing for something inevitable. They spoke of secrets buried deep, of a hunger that could never be sated, and of an old, forgotten pact. I didn't understand their words at first, the meaning hidden beneath layers of cryptic messages. forest, shadows moving between the trees, a feeling of being watched, hunted. And then I saw it. The house. It wasn't my house, not as I knew it. It was the same structure, the same walls, but it was different, older, decayed, as if it had been abandoned for centuries. The windows were shattered, the wood was rotten, and there were symbols carved into the walls, strange, twisting symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. And there, standing in the doorway, were the two men. Their faces were clearer now, the features sharp and grotesque, their eyes hollow and accusing. They stood there, watching me, waiting, and then they spoke. Their voices echoed through the air. "You belong to us," they said, and the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I understood, in that moment, that the house was not just haunted, it was cursed. The spirits, these men, were not branded ghosts. They were bound in this place, trapped in a cycle of torment, and they sought to escape. And they needed me. I was not just a victim, I was the key, the bridge between their world and mine. The whispers, the shadows, it was all a part of their plan, a way to weaken a barrier between the living and the dead. They had chosen me, and now they were ready to take what they wanted. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, and I felt the pressure building in the room, a force that seemed to press down on me from all sides. The walls began to tremble. The symbols from my vision appeared, etched into the plaster, glowing with a sickly green light. I could feel the energy, a pulsing, throbbing sensation that made my skin crawl. The men stepped closer, their forms shifting and flickering, and I realized they were trying to cross over me, to break through the thin veil that separated us. The air was thick with their presence, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe, and I knew if I didn't do something, they would succeed. With a burst of adrenaline, I scrambled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, and I ran. I ran towards a door, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But as I reached for the handle, the door slammed shut, the force of it knocking me backward. I hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of me, and for a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. The chanting was deafening now, a cacophony that filled my head, drowning out everything else. I looked up, and there they were, standing over me, their hollow eyes fixed on mine, their mouths moving in unison. "Accept your fate," they whispered, their voices blending together into a single, terrible sound. I could feel the coldness spreading, seeping into my skin, my bones, as if they were trying to pull me into their world, to make me one of them. Panic surged through me. I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. A scream that came from the deepest part of me, a primal, desperate sound that seemed to cut through the chanting, through the darkness. The symbols on the walls flickered, their light dimming, and for a moment, the figures wavered, their forms blurring as if they were losing their hold on reality. I took that moment and forced myself to move, to get up, to fight. I reached for the nightlight, the only source of warmth left in the room, and held it up, the soft glow pushing back the shadows. The men recoiled, their faces twisting in anger, their forms dissolving into mist, and I knew I had found their weakness. Light. It was the only thing that could keep them at bay, the only thing that could break their hold. I stumbled towards the window, pulling the curtains open, letting the moonlight flood the room, and with it, the shadows retreated, the chanting fading into nothing. The room was silent again, the air still and cold, but the presence was gone. I sank to the floor, my body trembling, tears streaming down my face. I had faced them, confronted the darkness, and for now, I had won. But I knew this was not the end. The revelation had changed everything. The house was cursed, and I was a part of that curse. They would come again, and next time, they would be stronger. I had seen the truth, and there was no escaping it. The terror was not over. It had only just begun. The aftermath of that night was not a return to normalcy. It was the beginning of something far darker. The room, even in the daylight, felt tainted, as though the events of that night had left an invisible mark on the walls, on the floor, on everything I touched. I could still feel it, the lingering cold, the heavy presence that made every breath seem harder to take. I knew that what had happened wasn't just a nightmare, but a collision between two worlds, and I was caught in the middle. The line between reality and the supernatural had been crossed, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and fear. I could no longer sleep without the light on, but even then, I felt no comfort. The voices had quieted, but they hadn't disappeared. I could still hear them, whispers at the edge of my consciousness, just waiting for the darkness to fall. They were patient, biding their time, and I could feel their anger, their frustration at being pushed back. It was as if they were planning, regrouping, waiting for the perfect moment to return. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of shadow, sent a jolt of fear through me, a reminder that they were always there, lurking just out of sight. One evening, I found myself drawn to the closet. It was the place I had always avoided, the place where I felt their presence the strongest. Something was pulling me towards it, an unexplainable compulsion that I couldn't resist. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, the metal cold against my skin. Slowly, I opened the door, the hinges groaning in protest, and there, in the darkness, I saw something that made my heart stop. Scratched into the back wall, barely visible in the dim light, were the same symbols I had seen in my visions. Twisted, chaotic lines that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat, and the cold swept over me again. An all-too-familiar chill that told me I was not alone. The whispers returned, soft at first, like a breeze rustling through leaves, but growing louder, more insistent. They were angry, demanding, their words a jumbled mess of threats and promises. You cannot escape, they said, and I knew they were right. The house was theirs, and by confronting them, I had given them power over me. I was marked, a part of their world now, and there was nothing I could do to change that. The terror came to a head one final night. The house was deathly silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making every small noise seem deafening. I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my body tense, waiting, and then the temperature plummeted. The air grew so cold I could see my breath misting in front of me, and I knew they were here. The shadows began to move, slithering across the walls, pooling in the corners of the room. I could see their shapes, the outlines of figures stepping out from the darkness, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their mouths moving in a silent chant. I tried to move, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, held in place by an invisible force that seemed to seep into my very bones. One of the figures moved closer, its face inches from mine, and I could feel the cold radiating off of it, a chill that burned. "You are ours," it whispered, its voice echoing inside my head, a terrible, hollow sound that filled me with a despair so deep I thought I might drown in it. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing closer, the ceiling lowering, until it felt like I was being crushed, consumed by the darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The figures faded, the shadows retreated, and the warmth slowly returned. I was left lying there, gasping for breath, my heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. The silence that followed was absolute, a void that seemed to swallow everything, and I knew that I had survived, but only just. The spirits had been pushed back once again, but I could feel their presence, their anger, simmering beneath the surface. They hadn't gone away. They were simply waiting, biding their time until I was weak enough for them to try again. The days turned into weeks, and I knew I could not stay in that house any longer. The fear was too great, the presence too strong, and I could no longer tell where the real world ended and the supernatural began. I left, taking only what I needed, leaving behind the room that had once been my sanctuary but had become my prison. But even as I walked away, I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. The curse wasn't tied to the house, it was tied to me. The terror I had experienced wasn't over. It was only dormant, a dark cloud that would follow me wherever I went. I survived, but I was not unscathed. The experience had left me changed, marked by something beyond my understanding. I tried to return to normal, to live my life, but there was always that lingering fear, that sense that they were still with me, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The whispers, though quieter now, were always there, a reminder of what I had faced, and what I would face again. I knew the truth. The terror was not gone, it was simply waiting, and one day, it would return. And when it did, I would be ready, or I would be lost forever. After leaving the house behind, I thought I could finally escape the nightmares that had plagued me for so long. I moved far away, to a different town, into a new place where the air felt lighter, where sunlight filled every corner, and shadows had no place to hide. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to leave the darkness behind. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to realize that the past doesn't let go so easily. The fear followed me, like a shadow that never quite left, an invisible chain that bound me to something far beyond my control. The whispers had grown quieter, almost inaudible, but they were still there, lurking at the edge of my awareness. Sometimes in the dead of night, I would hear them, faint echoes that seemed to drift on the wind, carrying with them the same chilling familiarity. "We are still here," they would say, their voices softer now, but no less menacing. I would lie awake, staring into the darkness, my heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. The shadows in my new room seemed different, less threatening, but I knew better than to let my guard down. The sense of unease was always there, a constant reminder that what I had experienced was far from over. I tried to return to a semblance of normal life, to forget the horrors that had once consumed me. I went to work, I made new friends, I tried to build a new routine, but there was always a part of me that remained detached, distant, as if I was living in two worlds at once. One where everything seemed normal, and one where the darkness still waited, just beneath the surface. It was in the quiet moments, when I was alone, that the memories would return, vivid and haunting. I would see their faces in my mind, those hollow eyes, the twisted smiles, and I could feel their presence, even though I knew they weren't there. Or maybe they were, just waiting for me to let my guard down. One night, I was sitting in my living room, the television on, but the sound muted, when I felt it, a sudden drop in temperature, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. My breath fogged in front of me, and I knew, without a doubt, that they had found me. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, deeper, stretching across the walls, and I could hear it again, the soft scraping, like nails dragging across wood. My heart pounded, and I could feel the fear rising, that same primal terror that had gripped me so many times before. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that it wasn't real, but the whispers started again, soft and mocking, and I knew that they were here. I stood up, my hands trembling, and turned on every light in the room, the harsh glow pushing back the darkness. The whispers faded, the temperature slowly returning to normal, but the sense of dread remained. I realized, in that moment, that I could never escape them. They were a part of me now, a shadow that would follow me no matter where I went. The house had been cursed, yes, but so was I, and no amount of distance, no amount of light, could ever truly banish them. The experience had changed me, left me marked in a way that I could never undo. I saw the world differently now. Every shadow, every unexplained noise, was a reminder of what lay beyond the veil, of the things we are not meant to understand. I knew that the spirits, the voices, were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. They were patient, and they had all the time in the world. I could live my life, try to move on, but the fear was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, a reminder that they were never truly gone. Sometimes I wonder what they want, why they chose me, why they won't let go. I wonder if there's something I'm supposed to do, some way to break the curse, to finally be free. But deep down, I know the truth. There is no escape. They are a part of me now, a dark presence that will never leave. I can live with the lights on, I can surround myself with people, but when the night falls and the silence settles in, I know that they will be there, waiting. And one day, they will come for me again. Until then, I try to live, to find moments of peace, to push the darkness back as best I can. But I know that the terror is not over, is simply waiting, a shadow that will follow me for the rest of my life. And as I sit here, writing this, I can feel the cold creeping in again, the whispers growing louder, and I know that they are near. I am not alone, and I never will be. This is my reality, a life lived in the shadow of something far beyond my understanding. And if you ever feel the cold, if you ever hear the whispers in the dark, remember, they are always there, watching, waiting, and there is no escape.